Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, North Carolina people's in the Centenary United Methodist Church in Winston-Salem. We're here for a very special event by Bookmark Incorporated, one of those wonderful organizations that keeps books in front of citizens all year round. We're here for a very special event. Jan Karen is here to lead a discussion on her works this evening, and we have the good fortune of meeting and talking with her in just a few seconds.
Sponsored in part by Wachovia, helping North Carolina people realize their financial goals since 1879. And through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.
Well, it's good to see you here in this wonderful part of North Carolina, and not near Lenore where you came from, but it's good to have you back in the state.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, Dr. Friday.
Well, you've been one of us for so long. We all claim you, even though you're temporarily in Virginia, I'll say.
Temporarily in Virginia. I love being claimed.
It's been interesting to read about you, and I guess I want to begin by that interval in your life when you were so successful in the advertising business in Raleigh, and you just won the Kelly Award, which was the highest recognition for creative expression in advertising, and then all of a sudden you pull up and you go to Blowing Rock. Why?
Well, it's because I had a little bit of money to pull up and go. The Kelly Award was, did a wonderful thing for my self-confidence as a writer. I believe I really felt 10 feet tall when we won that together with my teammate, Michael. But it gave me the courage, I think, to do what I believe I'd been called to do at the age of 10, which was to write novels. Mm-hmm. And of course, you never know if you're going to write a novel that will make any money, Dr. Friday. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could just step off the cliff. Mm-hmm. And so I was scared, very scared.
So you settled in there and you started writing that novel, but it just didn't come together, that first one.
The characters were just as flat as flitters. They would not get up and move around. They wouldn't have their being. And so I was very discouraged because I'd given up a great deal, and I had also traded my Mercedes for a Toyota with rust on the fenders, which was a good experience in humiliation for me, I'll say. It's a character builder. Mm-hmm. I really had to cut back in order to grow as a writer. And because the country went into a fairly serious recession for a couple of years after I made that move, then I was not able to freelance very easily around the country. I had a good reputation, and a lot of people knew about me, but when that recession hit, they wanted to keep their own people working, so they didn't call on me to freelance. And it was just me and the Lord, just hunkering down, trying to figure out what to do next. And I was very discouraged because that novel wasn't working. It was like woman's dream turns to nightmare. And then one night lying in bed, that simple image of a priest walking down a village street.
60-ish?
60-ish.
Rector?
Yes, yes.
Why do you think that image came to you at that particular time?
I have no idea, because if anyone had said, would you like to write a book about a short, balding, 60-something bachelor priest, I would say absolutely not. I don't even know how to write a book about someone like that. But I was intrigued by this very small vision. This man just walking down the street. I sort of followed him in my mind's eye. And of course he went to a dog named Barnabas, and they went to a boy named Dooley, and then eventually we all went to his next door neighbor, Cynthia.
So you started writing these little stories in the Blowing Rocket, and you increased his circulation 30% overnight. Now, when did you decide, okay, it's going to be a book?
Well, when I had about 279 pages, something like that. And that ending, as we discussed before the show, just came naturally. It just said, okay, time for this book to end. And I thought, well, by George, I have a novel. Something I didn't even know how to do, and here it is. And so I started shopping it around, and nobody would buy it. They said, it's too preachy, or it's not right for our list. You've probably never had to submit a manuscript, but a lot of publishers will tell you it's just not right for our list that way.
Then you ran into Nancy Olson.
Yes, I was writing book 3, as a matter of fact. I did get published by a very small publishing house who had no way to distribute the books. I would put them in the trunk of my old beat-up car and go around and distribute them myself. And then that wonderful Nancy Olson, who immediately loved the Mitford series, said, Jan, you need an agent. Well, indeed I did, because I'd negotiated my own contracts for the first 2 books. So she introduced me to a woman in New York City named Liz Darnsoff. Liz is a big-time New York City agent. And I just didn't even know what we were going to talk about. I was so nervous. But we just hit it off, and she loved my books and introduced them to a young editor who is with me today, Carolyn Carlson, who, because she was a Lutheran minister's wife, daughter rather, understood, got the stories. And
when I was doing an interview recently with Herb Jackson, who is a very famous artist, and he writes very modern art, very different kind of art. And I asked him, when did you know where to start? How many layers of paint? When do you stop with this kind of work? He said, the painting talks to me. I got the impression from reading, especially your interview with the Charlotte papers, that your characters start talking to you, and the events take place, and you can't restrain it.
That's true. You know, you would think that I would have some control. I could hit delete and just completely dump a character that I don't think is going to work. But I try to stick with that character. If they walk into the story, then I want to give them free will and see what they'll do. In book 2, now I'm a woman who writes books without any cussing, Dr. Friday. No murder, no mayhem. And into my story walks Buck Leeper, a very profane man. Muddy boots, hard hat, drinks a lot of vodka, and smokes a lot of cigarettes, unfiltered. A man with deep problems, deep issues. How was I going to portray a profane man without using profanity? Well, I prayed about it. You know, I just said, Lord, there's got to be a way to do this without using what Jean-Henri Fabre called barbarous language. And so I was able to entertain Buck Leeper. He became a very favorite character. In fact, I was so worried about him that I found myself praying for him one night, and I thought, I'm working too hard.
Well, you know, you mentioned a moment ago, you don't have violence. You don't care to write about the stuff you see in books today. Now, 20 million copies later, the American readership public has responded to you. Is this because your stories make me feel like I'm walking down Main Street in Mitford, or which would be my town of Cherryville or Dallas or Hudson or somewhere in North Carolina? Isn't this the identity that you really create that makes me want to get with your characters and read about them?
Well, thank you. I like that idea very much. I believe that people can go live in my books. I know when I find a book, and it's rare that I do, that I can go live in it for a few days. It just is so wonderful. People know that around the next corner or the next page or next chapter, they're not going to encounter something violent. Nothing is going to blow up in their face. They can feel safe in Mitford. And you know, safety, Dr. Friday, and goodness are just as real as darkness and meanness. I mean, it's just, there's a dark side of the moon, there's a bright side of the moon, and both are equally real. I choose to write about the bright side, although some hard things happen in Mitford, as you know.
You know, in your career, you've done many fascinating things. In Charlotte, being on a freighter, going around in Europe, working in Germany. I sense all of this in some way talks to your characters through your hands and mind, and you're translating your own inner experience quite often through them into their expressions. You find you have to catch yourself every once in a while?
Well, actually, yes, I am all of my characters. There's a schizophrenic Miss Rose, married to one of my favorite characters, Uncle Billy. And Miss Rose is as mean as a snake. And I lived with a schizophrenic aunt in the family all of my almost all of my adult life. And it's a difficult illness. And hardly any money is out there to ever really explore that illness and find cures for schizophrenia. So, but I even identify with her in a sort of personal way. I mean, I even dress like her when I go to the post office.
How about Grandmama Fanny Clower? She seems to have been a great influence in your life.
Precious.
Really?
Precious. Miss Fanny she showed me what Jesus was all about by showing me unconditional love. Mama would disapprove if I misbehaved, and she would go get a little stinging switch or send me to get it myself and give me a whipping. But Mama loved me unconditionally. So while I didn't always hear about the Lord, it was being demonstrated to me and walked out in front of me every day.
You're in what book now? Which one are we working on right now? Are we in Mississippi?
We're in Mississippi, and I'm loving being in Mississippi.
How do you sit down every day and go to work? How much of a discipline is there in doing what you do? Because it depends so much on your own thinking process, your own emotional status, your own creative impulse. Do you have a work schedule you live by?
I had a work schedule for so long in advertising that I just cannot stand a work schedule anymore. But I do have to go down to the farmhouse and get that book written. So I know what has to be done. And sometimes I'm working in between the cracks. And sometimes I'm going down and giving it a full day and coming back exhausted, wrung out, but clearly thrilled that I've had a good day. If I can get 1,500 good words, if it feels right to me after 1,500 words, I've had a great day.
You ever go down there and spend all that time and tear it all up?
You know, maybe I should, and probably my critics think that's exactly what I should do, but so far, so good. Occasionally, I will dump a long scene. It just breaks my heart. But someone taught me, and I learned this in advertising, you've got to learn to kill your darlings. So sometimes I do have to kill my darlings.
Well, now you got Father Tim going into Mississippi, and I read you're probably going to Europe.
Ireland, yes.
Well, what's making him a transcontinental and multinational figure?
Well, he's been stuck like moss on a log to Mitford all these years. You know, he's afraid of flying. And Cynthia is a very vibrant woman and has been, by the way, I think, terribly good for him. She wants to go somewhere, and he's sort of promised her that he'll take her to Ireland. So he's going to have to step up to the plate and do it. So we won't see Mitford anymore. We'll never be in Mitford again. But I decided to keep that character, Dr. Friday, because I like him. He's easy to be with. I like his values. He can occasionally be witty. He's always getting in some kind of mess, which I find very interesting.
That's human.
So I thought, why dump him and start fresh with somebody I don't even know? I've been working on him now for 12 years. So he needed to go back home to Holly Springs. He didn't particularly want to go, but he needed to go. He hasn't been there for 40 years. And he's going to find something there that will change his life forever.
Tonight you're going to be here at Bookmark's big event in Winston-Salem at the church. Suppose one of these college students, there's so many of them in this area, just raises his hand and said, Miss Karen, is this a good thing for me to try to do, to be a novelist? What advice do you give a young person who comes at you with that gleam in his eye?
Well, first of all, you've got to put your derriere in the chair. You've just got to sit down and start paying attention. And it isn't brain surgery. You just start writing. You don't have to begin with a brilliant first sentence. I love a brilliant first sentence, by the way. But to begin in this craft, you don't need that. You just sit down. The whole point is to start. It's like turning on the tap and the water. You know, you've been away from home for a few weeks, and you turn on the tap, and you've got well water, and the water kind of runs out muddy. And then you let it run for a while. That starts to run clear. Then it starts to have good force. And that's the way it can happen if God has given you a gift to write. It will come forth, shining and clear.
Religion is obviously so much a part of you and everything you do and say. When did you receive that kind of focus in your life? Was there an epiphany, or was there a gradual transition in your thinking and emotional health and structure? Or what happened?
There was an epiphany, and thank you for asking that question. I was 42 years old and utterly lost. I was a very creative person. Always, since I was a child, I was drawing or writing or singing or dancing or something. And you know, that's a force. Creativity is a great force, and it can be used for good and it can be used for the other. But it can be also very distressing because you don't know what to do with it. It's a great mystery. And I had tried everything. And I always felt what the young Pascal called that empty space in the heart of every person that can only be filled by God. And I just, one night at the age of 42, I just was at the end of myself. And I called upon him to change my life, to save me from the lostness that I felt so keenly. And when I got up, it was at home in bed. In fact, that's where the first vision of Father Tim came from. The bed seems to be some icon in my life. But I got up the next morning and wondered what had happened. And it seemed really nothing had happened. I hadn't seen any lightning or visions or any of that, heard no voices. But I saw that my life was beginning in a very gradual way to change. And that empty space was beginning just barely to feel a little more filled. And it's still filling. You know, it has been the most wonderful thing that has ever happened to me.
That's quite a story. This question then comes to mind. As you look about America today, do you worry that there is too much of the disappearance of Mitfords, in the sense of the small communities getting absorbed by the urbanization, or not enough of the Father Tims working in the environment that way in communities? Or do you find it as you move around with your books and book meetings all over this nation, there's still Mitfords?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking that question. The small town is threatened. Yes, it's endangered. But there will always be Mitford wherever, and I hope this doesn't sound corny or overly sentimental. I don't mean to sound that way. Wherever decent people gather, wherever two or more gather, decent, wanting the best for themselves and for each other, just trying to make a living and raise their children and develop some character in their children, then there's Mitford. Now, this really does sound corny, but it works. If you take a pie to somebody, there's Mitford, not only in what it does for them, but in what it does for us, the giver. If we smile, I'm telling you, it sounds corny again, but a smile can make such a difference in that eye contact with somebody. Just the sense of connecting. I think Mitford is really all about connectedness.
If you grew up in the Great Depression, as I did, there's nothing wrong with what you just said, because you reached over the fence and borrowed a cup of sugar.
Yeah.
And you bought a loaf of bread for 10 cents. You had nothing, really, literally. Well, now, this question. You look at commercial television today, you look at some of the motion pictures, you see, as I just saw last week on 60 Minutes, a coach being bleeped 8 times in a 15-minute interview because of profanity. Do you worry about what you see happening in our country?
I think worry gains us nothing, because it is a raging ocean against which we cannot swim. But it breaks my heart. That's what it does. It breaks my heart that we have allowed ourselves, our culture, to be so infused with the maniacal and the wicked. I mean, I see Satan having a tap dance on our culture.
Do you see it in the political life as well? You've just been witnessing.
Throughout.
Really?
Throughout.
How about the church itself?
Yes, indeed, I do. I'm sorry to say.
How then do you see hope in the Mitfords that you do find? The basic structure of the country, I've always felt, rested in those small towns where people were church-going, and there were not people that viewed what you and I have been talking about. The country's got to reach back and draw upon that strength again, hasn't it?
Yes, and the only way we can do that, of course, is to stay connected. I know that sounds too simplistic, but we have to begin somewhere. It's like charity begins at home. Well, staying connected really begins at home. You have to learn how. I mean, we're not even shown how or taught how to be emotionally connected with loved ones. And that can only begin at home. We can't send our children to school and expect our teachers to teach our children to feel connected. So in the end, it really is about love. And I'm afraid that nobody has been home since the Second World War. The mothers went off to work because the fathers were being killed abroad. And since then, there just hasn't been anybody at home. And I think we need somebody at home.
Well, it certainly was a great source of strength to all of us. What does somebody like you find interesting reading? Whose authors appeal to you?
Well, I've just found the best book, but I cannot tell you her name because it's almost unpronounceable to me. She was a Russian Jew who was killed by the Nazis during the German occupation of France. It's called Sweet Française. And the backstory is almost as good as what she wrote. Her two daughters carried her manuscript after her death all over Europe. For 60 years, that manuscript was in a suitcase. And the older daughter just brought it forth. It's been published, and I highly recommend it. It is a gorgeously written book.
As you travel about the country, and you're out, say, in Wisconsin or Nebraska, what questions do people ask you most often about your work?
Well, first of all, and I just want to get this clear before they ask me any deeper questions, is, are you Cynthia?
Yeah,
and then
that's the inevitable question.
You'll love this. They want to know what liver mush is.
To those of us raised in North Carolina.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
We have to have it shipped into Virginia, you know. We have scrapple up there.
Yeah,
it's not the same.
Yeah, I know.
They also want to know where I get my characters, and of course I like to say that I really don't get my characters. As we discussed earlier, they get me. They come looking for me, and it's always a great surprise. I believe it was Sandberg who said, no surprise in the author, no surprise in the reader, so my readers should be plenty surprised.
I noticed that several times you use a line that I've read behind you. Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. That tells a lot about what you've just been saying. And that's what you found in human life?
Yes. There's so much hope in that. I believe it was said by a French clergyman in the 17th century.
And that's interesting to know that you can reach back and pull something like that out.
Every sinner has a future.
When did you do the cookbook?
Did the cookbook about 3 years ago. Had the biggest old time in the world because, you know, I'm not a great cook. I'm a good cook, but not a great cook. And so my books are loaded with food references. People say, Miss Karen, I gained 10 pounds just reading one of your books. Well, where were all those recipes going to come from? Certainly not from me. I did a few recipes in it. I got a wonderful Mississippi cook to pull all of those recipes together. So just about every food item in the Mitford books is referenced in the cookbook.
You have a favorite?
Puny's fried chicken would be right up there. I'm wild about fried chicken.
Well, you couldn't have been born where you were and raised where you were not be.
Right.
It's a little barbecue every once in a while,
Oh,
too.
barbecue, yes.
I'm sorry we don't have more time, Jan, to sit here and visit. I've certainly found this delightful, and thank you for sitting down in North Carolina people for this evening. And ladies and gentlemen, I know you've enjoyed meeting this very, very interesting personality and very widely read author in the United States, Jan Karon. So till next week then, good night.
Sponsored in part by Wachovia, helping North Carolina people realize their financial goals since 1879. And through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting Unc TV.
Hello, friends, again. For all those who work on North Carolina people at University Television, I have the happy privilege of wishing you a Merry Christmas and a New Year full of rich and wonderful blessings. This is a time of year for our families to get together, for children to play, and for all of us to think of how much we love each other. So for Bobby Dobbs, who's the producer of this program, and all who associate with it, whose names you will soon see, happy holidays and stay well.